Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games from indie to AAA and everything in between to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Developed by AdGlobe and Livewire and published by Binary Haze Interactive, Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist is the sequel to the hit indie Metroidvania Ender Lily's Quietest of the Nights. Set in the same world as the original game, Ender Magnolia takes place decades after the original in the land of fumes, where the rains of death cause a blight and all of society is kept safe by technology powered by magic. Part of this technology are the android-like robots known as homunculi, who have started to mutate and go insane due to a toxic gas emanating from below the land. Our protagonist Lilac is a young attuner, a magic user who can not only purify these deranged homunculi, but can harness their power to traverse the world, attack and defend herself to save the kingdom from the coming corruption. A sequel to such a solid Metroidvania begs for something bigger, better, and more complex than ever before. Don't forget to like and subscribe as we enter this haunting and corrupted futuristic world as a ray of hope amidst the darkness. As we wake up in an underground lab suffering from amnesia, then bump into a homunculi with a similar fate, you may get the feeling that Ender Magnolia is leaning somewhat on old and worn out tropes, and in terms of the story, you'd be right. But this is definitely made up for in the way developers AdGlobe and Livewire not only designed the world, but left enough space for you to fill in your own blanks. Leaving the incredible art design and world building for later, let's take a look at the gameplay. Ender Magnolia is a Metroidvania through and through, meaning the core pillars of the gameplay are around exploration, movement, and combat. Let's start with the exploration. This game's map is huge.
That's quite big. Impressive.
You'll start off with the singular objective to get to the upper district from the lower district, but what you don't realize is once you get up there, this is only around the halfway mark of the game, and you're already 10 hours in. No stranger to the genre, I went about checking for fake walls at every turn, and there's no shortage of them here. Oftentimes having gear or health upgrades hidden away in little nooks and crannies, often accompanied by some enemies or a chest to plunder. To start with, it's left incredibly vague as to where you're supposed to go, and whilst I never felt truly lost, you were never too sure if you were going the quote-unquote right way or if you were heading down an optional area. Well, as it turns out, there aren't any big optional areas, so if you spent a long time down a certain path, there was always something worthwhile, be it a boss, new technique, or a story moment at the end of it. Whenever I got a new technique for traversal or exploration, I always made a point of going back and seeing where I'd opened a path to next. Speaking of traversal, I'd like to go over the double-edged sword of the movement in this game. With being a literal little girl, your movement is extremely limited to begin with, but unlike the original game, Ender Magnolia makes the bold choice to offer up a large swath of the standard Metroidvania traversal abilities within the first hour or two of the game. Abilities like a double jump, air dash, and even fast travel between checkpoints is handed out very early on, which if you are a veteran enjoyer of the genre like me, makes you either really worried or really excited in terms of how progression works from here. There are further abilities such as a ground dash, wall climbing and so on, but my issue with these is that they all take a significant amount of time to charge up before releasing them, meaning any sense of momentum when it comes to platforming is more or less removed. As such, the actual traversal in this game, whilst fluid when grabbing onto a wall, climbing up ledges or air dashing, actually feels quite slow when doing anything else. I'm not sure if this is a deliberate choice to go along with the grim, dark and moody world, or if it's a comment on the fact that you're using spirits to help this young girl pull off these feats, but there's a lot of value in having significant momentum in your movement mechanics in this type of game. As a result, we don't really see any difficult platforming or challenge of any kind in this regard, instead making the challenge sit more in the realm of combat. To discuss the combat of the game, we need to dive into a few of the systems on how the attuned homunculi abilities work.
Oh, you're my little homunculus.
Don't do that.
Essentially, you start with the one homunculus Nola, who acts as your primary attack. You use this ability to beat bosses and gain other abilities, which are slotted into the face buttons on your controller. Now, in an interesting switch up from the original game, in which there were over 20 different spirits for you to find and use, there's now only 8. That being said, each of these 8 beings have 3 different attack types, which you can upgrade independently of each other. In my opinion, this was a great decision, allowing more character building and individual moments between the main character and the homunculi accompanying her, without some of them being shoved to the background, never to get any screen time. On top of this, the different abilities of the 8 homunculi have a certain attack type, and can carry with them elemental affinities. Primary attacks being your main attack, pressure attacks keeping sustained damage to the enemy, cooldown attacks as a one-off power move, and autonomous as something you summon in and attacks independently of you. The elemental affinities mean that certain attacks will inflict frost, fire or shock buildup as you use them, allowing you to debuff enemies as you fight. This allows a massive amount of build variety, and in some cases certain abilities will absolutely destroy a boss, whilst others are more or less pointless. For example, a boss that spends the entire fight in the air would encourage you to use ranged attacks, whilst a hyper-aggressive boss would benefit from some defensive cooldown moves and autonomous attacks while you spend the majority of the time dodging. Juggling multiple enemies with your different skills, or swapping out one of your team for another to take down a troublesome boss, feels really rewarding here, and you can tell the majority of the focus and development time was on these grandiose boss fights where you really have to pick and choose who you're taking into battle. The way the general combat flow works is the enemy has a red health bar and a secondary yellow bar, where attacks break damage goes. Essentially, when this yellow bar is exhausted, the enemy will become stunned, allowing you to either heal or get some free hits in. The enemy will often glow before attacking, and allow you the opportunity to either dodge, counterattack, or block it if you have the right equipment. You can also use some of the traversal abilities or cause enemies to take fall damage, which destroys certain parts of them. This doesn't grant them any different moves, but it does change how they look, and in the process gives you some scrap, which you use to upgrade the equipment Lilac has. You'll also unlock some extra power moves later in the game, with each homunculi having a completely unique attack and extremely cinematic animation to go with it, which is really cool and does a lot of damage. Something else worth talking about when it comes to the combat is the different equipment Lilac can have equipped. The carapace is a single item slot that allows her to block an attack, oftentimes with a parry-like counter when timed correctly, whilst the bracelets just act as a sort of buff item to improve stats. The totem on the other hand improves more important characteristics, like increasing the number of healing charges or granting a second chance when near death. Last but certainly not least in Lilac's loadout would be the relics, this game's version of charms. An interesting choice here is that if you grind money every now and then as you expand the items available in the shop, you can end up with an incredibly large amount of relic slots, making you incredibly powerful. If, like me, you didn't want to grind currency for slots, you could still get quite a few just through regular gameplay. I'll be honest, the relics aren't really anything particularly out there or crazy, offering any real changes to gameplay, more just supplementing the playstyle you've picked your abilities to revolve around. For instance, you pick relics buffing elemental affliction damage if you picked abilities that caused enemies to burn, but there's no real synergy present in them. That being, if you equip 2 complementary charms, they wouldn't play off each other, like you could see in games like Hollow Knight, where gameplay features could actually change depending on what you had equipped. A shame, but at least there was a large list of them to pick from. Next, let's have a look at the most impressive aspect of combat in Ender Magnolia, the bosses. To begin with, I was a little worried that I was going to breeze through this game. After about the halfway mark, I'd never died more than once or twice to any given boss. Luckily, and I suppose unluckily for me, this massively changed when reaching the upper district. Once entering the latter half of the game, enemy attacks went from small localized fireballs to screen-filling beams, massive sweeping mechanical arms, and more projectiles than you knew what to do with.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
I'm glad there was such a jump in difficulty with the bosses where I actually had to start learning some attack patterns instead of just spamming attacks until I won, and I found the parry homunculi to be invaluable as the game went on. Even though the bosses stopped being allies you could recruit for more attacks, they still offered some story dialogue or even cutscenes to fill in more of the blanks around what happened to Lilac and Nola prior to them losing their memories. Quite a few of the bosses were souped up versions of regular enemies, but they did add in some new attacks to keep things fresh. Like I say, if you're here for boss fights, there's nothing too standout beyond their visual design until you get to the second half of the game. I'm a bit worried that I've come across as overly negative in this review so far, and I want to assure you that I'm anything but negative on this game. I genuinely did have fun with it for the time that I had, so much so I actually 100% completed it. As such, I want to dedicate a bit of time to what I believe to be the biggest selling point of this game is, outside of the combat, the world and art style. Ender Magnolia has more or less the same art style as its predecessor. This lends an almost anime style design to its human characters, whilst making the homunculi and associated bosses and enemies look like they're ripped straight from a horror manga panel. It's this soft character design, mixed with the rugged look of the enemies placed on a background that looks as if it were a painting, that offers this series' unique character. The bleak, melancholic world with rot at the heart of it has some moments of purity in it, mainly in boss arenas and key story sequences where a white blossom fills the area and rays of light permeate the gloom. This metaphor for the player character and the characters joining her on the quest being rays of hope in the dark didn't go unnoticed by me, and I know a lot of effort went into making these set pieces. As well as the detailed environment design, there are also findings, which act as small story notes you can find scattered throughout the map. These extra bits of lore give insight into the motivations of main and side characters alongside the big boss of the game, and really shows how some of the humans in this game sacrifice their humanity to try and live on as homunculi, only to fall to corruption and go against the very principles they upheld in the past. The cheery characters, in stark contrast to the dark environment, is also pretty refreshing, rather than everyone being a bit doom and gloom like in Dark Souls. As with Ender Lilies, the music is once again top notch, perfectly encapsulating the idea of this frail girl of noble blood fighting against twisted abominations to bring light to the world. Boss music is just as punchy as ever, and the area music is always just that little bit haunting, with a seemingly little bit of French inspiration in there. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? I really enjoyed this game, and my own personal completionist playthrough took me just under 20 hours. If you're a main story type of person, not looking for too many bonus upgrades or extra endings, the main story on its own is around 15 hours. This means that for once, my experience and the completionist's experience are the same at 20 hours. Maybe less if you follow a guide from start to finish. This game definitely respects your time as a player, being significant in length without being too long and grindy. Even with the final few achievements needing you to grind out a bit of cash, this can take around 5 minutes in the right spot with the right relics equipped. Achievements aside, for the most part, checkpoints are pretty close together, and you have the option to travel back to the last one you rested at from the pause menu, meaning short play sessions are just as encouraged as long ones. I found this to be a perfect Steam Deck game, as well as playing it on my PC. As I said before, you also get the large majority of traversal abilities up front, showing this sequel wants the pace of the game to be significantly smoother than the original, giving you options at every turn. One such option I'm yet to mention is the not so hidden difficulty sliders. You'll start the game on normal to begin with, but once you hit your first bench in the game, you'll be able to set custom modifiers in the difficulty menu, adjusting things from enemy damage, attack frequency and health, to masochistic options like disabling healing or dying in one hit. If you've been around the channel long enough, you'll know I love options over any sort of strict difficulty, and not only is it here, it actually serves a purpose. Similar to the newer Resident Evil games, you get a background point score for various things, but this is completely hidden to you as you play the game. What these difficulty sliders do is increase or decrease the rate you obtain this point score depending on what you choose, and these points can be spent on character art, concept designs, and additional costumes for Lilac. Hats off to the developers, this is how you do difficulty in games. Overall, I recommend Ender Magnolia, Bloom in the Mist. Whether you're a Metroidvania fan or not, the grimdark fantasy world overrun with mutant homunculi is begging to be explored, and with a cast of interesting and deep characters, you'll enjoy every minute of this tight and reasonably priced indie game. Something that offers a somewhat lackluster story, but impressive world design and really fun combat. There's plenty of game to enjoy here whether you're a fan of the original game or just coming to the series for the first time. There's a lot to be said about a set of incredibly solid game mechanics in the backdrop of a detailed, artistically driven world, and I'm all for it. Don't miss out on this second iteration on a classic indie gem, or you'll regret it. Do you have time for Ender Magnolia, Bloom in the Mist? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game, alongside a bit more of a deep dive on the time you have to invest, so you know what you're getting into, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you subscribe, I'm looking to put out regular content like this alongside some more in-depth video essays and freeform videos, so stick around, and if you have any requests on future videos, just drop them in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino. Look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.